Welcome everyone to this session of the Jeju Forum 2020, in which we're going to be discussing the Korean Peninsula after the US election. Of course, the session is taking place while we still don't know who the next US president is going to be. It seems that candidate Biden has the upper hand, but we still don't know whether he will win the electoral vote. So what we're going to be discussing today with my four panelists that I will introduce in a second is both what might happen in the Korean Peninsula, both with South Korea and North Korea, if Biden becomes the president and he's the US president from January, but also we're going to discuss a little bit what might happen if President Trump wins re-election. My name is Ramon Pacheco Pardo. I am the KFBUB Korea Chair at the Institute for European Studies, who is co-organizing this session together with the Korea Center at the Wilson Center and together with the Jeju Forum. Other than being the KFBUB Korea Chair, I'm also a reader at King's College London, and I also have participated in some Track 1.5 and Track 2 dialogues with South Korea, North Korea, China, and Japan. I'm going to move on to introduce the four panelists. After introducing each of them, we'll have 5 minutes for the introductory remarks. Afterwards, we will have a discussion among ourselves that I will be moderating. And towards the end of the session, we will have a discussion in which the audience, all of you, will be invited to ask questions. We know we have some participants, some audience who are live from Jeju-do. That's the advantage of actually controlling coronavirus. You can actually attend events. We know we also have audience on the YouTube channel of the Jeju Forum, and we also have other members of the audience who are following us via Zoom. So feel free to ask your questions, and we'll be collecting them and answering them towards the end of the session. So without any further ado, I'm going to start by introducing the panelists. We have 4 speakers, 2 from South Korea and 2 from the US, Ambassador Jun, Chancellor Kim, Director Lee, and Dr. Kim. So I'm going to start by introducing Ambassador Jun. Ambassador Jun is currently a senior advisor at the United States Institute of Peace. He's joining us actually from Oregon. And as you probably know, he was the US ambassador to Malaysia between 2013 and 2016. And of course, he was also US Special Envoy on North Korea between 2016 and 2018. For his services to the US government, he received the Presidential Meritorious Service Award, 4 Superior Honors Awards, and 9 Foreign Service Performance Awards from the US Department of State. Ambassador Jun, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pardo. I am delighted to be here. It's a real pleasure for me to be here, especially at these exciting times, I might say. As you noted, I'm speaking from Portland, Oregon, where we have been following election results very, very carefully. Right now, it still remains quite uncertain as to who will be the next president. But if I was a betting man, I think I would put my money on Biden, because it seems he has a much clearer path to White House than President Trump. So I'm sure we all want to know, what is Biden like? What might his presidency be like? And there has been a lot of speculations. And I think a lot of people think Biden will be like Obama 3. Well, I'm not sure I agree with that assessment, because Biden has tremendous amount of experience. He was for a senator for 36 years. And of course, he was vice president for 2 years. So unlike President Obama, when he came to the presidency in 2009, Biden comes with a lot of experience. And this matters greatly, especially when we come to hotspots, places like the Korean Peninsula, because he already has an idea of what he would like to do, what he wants to do, and what he has done in the past. I mean, let me just point out that Biden himself is very much pro-engagement. He's very much pro-democracy, and so that's going to be an important issue. More recently, what struck me most about candidate Biden is his statement he made, few days ago, to the Korean community in the United States and to the Koreans in Korea. I thought that statement, which was made exclusively to a Korean news outlet, Yonhap, was very, very significant. It shows that he thought about issues. And for him, the most important issues for Biden are what to do about denuclearization of North Korea. To me, he seemed very committed about denuclearization of North Korea. And second issue, he seemed to be very committed is the alliance issue. You know, what do we do about US troops in South Korea? What do we do with about strategic influence of United States in Korean Peninsula? So for all those things, I think it is very, very important that we understand President Biden, understand his ideology and how we go about it. Now, Dr. Pardo, there is still a chance that President Trump can win. And so I think we need to assess what his second term might be like. Is it going to be like the first term, or is it going to be different? I would say one big difference between Biden and Trump is that Biden is unlikely, not likely, to have as many summit meetings as Donald Trump did. As you recall, Donald Trump had 3 meetings in matter of 12 months with Kim Jong-un, totally unprecedented. Now, my hope is that President Biden does not undo many things that President Trump did, such as opening new channels of communications. So I think that's very important. You know, often the instinct of new American president, especially if they're from a different party, is to undo what the other person has done previously, especially on controversial and sensitive foreign affairs and security issues. You've seen President Trump do that on a number of issues, including Iran, climate change, and so on, TPP. My hope is that the progress Trump made on Korean issues, which is opening new channels, that Biden should keep, because ultimately there is no solution to the North Korean challenge, which is foremost security, as well as the long-suffering people in North Korea, without diplomacy. The other solution, military solution, is completely unthinkable, and this is really should be taken off the table. Thank you very much, Dr. Pardo.
Thank you very much to you. We will be discussing, as you said, both a potential Biden presidency and a potential second term by President Trump during the discussion later, and I'm sure there will be questions about both of them. So let's move on now to Chancellor Kim from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, who was a key contributor to South Korea's new Southern policy, the policy that the current administration is following towards Southeast Asia and India. He has also participated in South Korean delegations to 1.5 track dialogues in Europe, in Finland. And before becoming Chancellor of the Diplomatic Academy, he was a researcher at the American Parliamentary Peace Foundation, and he is also a professor at Handong University. And actually, Chancellor Kim is live from Jeju. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Pardo. Good to see you all. And actually, yes, as you said, I'm here in Jeju Forum on site by myself, and the many setups, and the beautifully set up, actually, I should say. And I'm happy to see you even in online. And I'm very honored to be part of this very important and timely discussions. And actually, you introduced me nicely, and with the coining of the policy, new Southern policy, actually I coined the new Northern policy too. So don't forget that. And actually, Ambassador Yoon set up the standard before me. Actually, I thought we are going to present a special topic, and then we're gonna take the questions following presentation. So I try to give you my general, actually my title given to me is about the US ROK alliance. So I'm giving you a general view over alliance, and then I'm going to take the questions specifically depending on who will be the president. Yeah, we have a lot of things to say about alliance issue, but I'm going to focus on the issue of this equality, mutuality of ROK ROK-US alliance. I call it the issue of mythification of ROK-US alliance. I often argued in lectures, interviews, and columns that in most Koreans' perception, the alliance has gained a status of, in my opinion, a myth or even religion. If I say Korea's national interest is much more important than ROK-US alliance here in with the media, or the alliance is only an instrument or interest, surprisingly enough, many Koreans would feel uncomfortable. I experienced a lot. Those comments are just common sense, but anyone thinking rationally can hardly deny it. But Koreans are different in this regard. The relationship has been called a blood alliance, sure. And since the two countries fought together in the Korean War, the alliance has continued until now, since its formalization in 1953 by Mutual Defense Treaty. If we can recount the war, that is exactly a 7-decade-long relationship. It is a historically very rare case and still going strong. No question about it. But it has not been a shoulder-to-shoulder relationship. Instead, South Korea has consistently been under the US security protection, a junior partner of an uneven alliance structure. Rather, the relationship of the two has looked more like patron-client relations. America's dominant influence over ROK's politics, economy, and society, as well as the military, has constrained the Korea's autonomy considerably. Even when the Cold War came to an end in the early 1990s, which was the original cause of Korea's policy dependence on the US, the autonomy has not improved much, if at all. Of course, there was some signs and events that weakening military alliance symbolized by series of inter-Korean rapprochement. Also, the two liberal regimes, Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, tried to acquire more autonomy. However, it produced a more negative reaction from the US and within ROK. The two subsequent conservative regimes in Korea tried to reverse and erase the two former regimes' effort. The recent great power rivalry and security dilemma around the Korean Peninsula and Pyongyang's nuclear adventure are still providing legitimate ground for the continuing disparity between the two. Under the present Moon administration, situations are not very different. It still seems taboo for Koreans to criticize alliance or to talk about the adjustment of alliance. The withdrawal or the possibility of withdrawal actually initiated by Trump government and President Trump, and even reduction of US foreign forces in Korea can only be said by Washington, not Seoul. It would be a disgraceful and ungrateful thing to say. If you say that loud, you'd be framed as a radical left, calming pro-North, Actually, I was called many times. Of course, there are some people who criticize, they blame America and US, ROK-US alliance as the perpetrator of the division of Korean Peninsula. However, they are minority group who has little political power here. The majority of Koreans consider the alliance essential that its reason of existence should not even be questioned. It is a sacred area where rational and logical debate sometimes cannot exist. And American society, we have been witnessing throughout this election and so on, very divisive. I was very surprised to hear such words, Antifa, communism, radical left from America, since those words have been very commonplace here in Korea, even after the collapse of the Cold War. Korean society has become very ideologically divided too, and alliance has become the core or even the symbol of this division. The division of the Korean Peninsula has deeply affected almost every aspect of life in Korea. The conservative top priority is always national security through deterrence by a strong military alliance with the US, believing that engagement in North Korea is unlikely to change North's behavior. At the other end of political spectrum, progressives favor peace and inter-Korean cooperation. To them, peace is not a choice, but an inevitable mission to end the 7 decades of mutual hostilities. Progressives believe that DPRK developed its nuclear program mainly out of fear and insecurity, much of which was caused by US and its military alliance with ROK. In other words, deterrence itself creates a security dilemma, whereby a move by one side to shore up its deterrence capability to feel safe makes the other side insecure as a result, leading it to boost its own capabilities. It isn't an ideological divide about which security mechanism is better for Korea, peace versus deterrence. The Moon government peace initiative reignited this debate over the nature of desirable security mechanism for the Korean Peninsula. Yes, the armistice agreement has prevented a return to war on the peninsula and granted minimum security to Korean people. But it has failed to overcome chronic tensions and repeated military crises between the two Koreas, worsened by the power struggles of neighboring powers. Whenever progressive government pursue peace initiative, conservative opponents regard it as actively walking away from the older structure of the security mechanism, and they condemn such effort as jeopardizing ROK-US alliance. Recently, we start to talk about political, symbolic gesture of, declaring the end of war. Still, in the middle of, in the center of ideological debate here. That's the big evidence. Moon continued to working on achieving peace without sacrificing national security, but he had to face serious concerns that his peace initiative would weaken national security, and that if he were to achieve sustainable peace with North Korea no longer a threat, the legitimacy of the alliance might wane. In this context, Moon has had to work tightrope between the guarding national security with a solid US alliance while simultaneously encouraging diplomatic engagement with North Korea. Moon clearly realized that to be successful, he must closely coordinate with the US. Although the peace process may alter the Cold War framework of deterrence and to some extent the US alliance, Moon has repeatedly emphasized that the alliance will continue to be a main pillar of national security even after denuclearization are achieved on the Korean Peninsula. This is where President Moon's peace initiative looks ambivalent, which makes his government for easy prey to ideological framing here. Though Moon has repeatedly emphasized that security based on deterrence won't be sacrificed under the peace initiative, the historical and ideological division still besets him. Being aware of conservative suspicions, Moon has stressed even more national defense as Seoul's top priority by increasing country's defense budget and advancing schedules for existing weapon system. In fact, this ambivalence structurally originates from what has been termed the trilemma of peace on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea's three main goals are establishing a peace regime first, denuclearization of North Korea second, and maintaining the ROC-US alliance. Two may be achieved with a little conflict, but all three cannot be achieved simultaneously without one being undermined or even abandoned. Conservatives have been fierce about pursuing denuclearization alliance, while progressives have sought peace and denuclearization. And actually, I try to raise the question, and then if I get the questions, and I will answer that. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you. Very comprehensive, and I'm sure there will be questions about the alliance and obviously the results of the election coming to all of you and to the other panelists. We're going to move on to our third speaker, who is Dr. Kim, who is joining us from Seoul. You probably know her. She's the host of the Cheung Kim evening show on TBS FM, one of the leading evening radio shows in Korea. Previously, she was the host of MBC's 100-minute debate, a very respected political debate program, very popular in Korea as well. She was also the director of the Public Opinion Studies Center at the Asan Institute of Policy Studies, one of the leading think tanks in Korea. She's also a lecturer at Yonsei University. Dr. Kim, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. It's my great pleasure and honor to be here. And as introduced, I worked as the director of the Public Opinion Studies Center at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. And as having been one of the pollsters, I feel really, really grave responsibility for what is really happening in the United States right now. I mean, I have nothing to say about this. One is okay, but the second time it's just they have to go. Anyway, I like to talk about the Korean people's attitude toward the United States, and also including and how they view the alliance. Before I say that, whenever I talk to the people's attitude and opinion toward the United States, then I have to go with China. I mean, people's opinion cannot really be explained without the China factor. So it may a little bit contrast to what Professor Kim Jun-hyung just said. Well, now Korean people do not really feel the necessity of the alliance and have a strong feeling for the United States, and not because of the North Korean threat. It is because of China. It has changed a long time ago. So of course, North Korea, to some people or to other people, maybe not, but a lot of people, it is still a threat. But they feel that alliance is necessary because there is a threat coming from China, and that has been happening for a long time. And it has more aggravated since the 2017, when the China had economic retaliation on Korea over the THAAD issue. So it wasn't 2017, the February public opinion survey I myself did. There, the favorability of rating for each country, including US, China, North Korea, and Japan, at that time, the score was even lower than that of Japan. You guys have some knowledge of Korea, so you probably understand what I mean. So at that time, the China's score has dropped down dramatically, and at the same time with the score of the President Xi Jinping as well. I mean, before then, like in 2014 and 2015, China and Xi Jinping has been enjoying really high score. It was almost catching up the US and President Obama. So, and even the questions like, which country do you think we have to be with or take side with between the United States and China if they are competing to each other? Around 2014 and 15, it was just the 60% of Koreans chose the US over China, and around 30% of Koreans chose China over US. But I just checked it out, even though I'm not the director anymore at the ASEAN. When I checked it out, like 2019, 75% of Korean respondents chose the United States over China. So that THAAD and the economy retaliation trauma still remain in among the Korean people. And I believe if we do the same survey, the feeling against China probably have aggravated even further because of that COVID-19. So I think, well, I mean, this. I don't, maybe some people, the policymakers, have some ideas about how and different idea to look at the alliance and the changing and developing relations between Korea and the United States. But in reality, the Korean public have much stronger feeling toward the United States. That's what I see. And also the alliance, well, the numbers probably have changed a little bit, but I do not really think it has changed dramatically. But around it, like in 2017, the people felt the alliance is much necessary, and those who support the alliance was reaching at 90%. So what I mean is 90% of Korean respondents thought they needed, and they thought alliance between the two countries is necessary. And again, well, the partly is because of the North Korean threat, but is mostly coming from China. What I could find out was there was a question like, what if the Korea reunify? I mean, there's a reunification, which means that North Korean threat is not anymore there and it's gone. But still, quite a lot of Koreans actually needed an alliance with the United States. It's more than the 60%. And even the US Army stationing in Korean Peninsula as well. So for many reasons, before maybe some ultra conservative probably they still feel the North Korean threat is so grave and they need an alliance for that reason, and still and think the alliance is one of the religions of theirs. But in general, a lot of Korean public have a feeling toward the alliance and even the stationing of the U.S. Army in South Korea. And that is not basically coming, it is not mainly coming from the threat of the North Korea, but rather the threat from China. And also I like to emphasize that it is not just the elderly. I mean, when we talk about the conservatives in Korea, and then we automatically think about those elderly people who are on the street every Saturday, they're holding the taegeuk. But it is rather from those who are in 20s, young generation. And there's a very stranded difference between the male and the females, and particularly the male, young males, like those who are in their 20s and early 30s, they have very conservative feeling, and particularly just in the security issues. I mean, socially, economically, they are very liberal, but on the security issues, the young males are very conservative. And the difference between the young males and the elderly is this: the elderly, they see North Korea is an enemy, and also at the same time, they're one of us. But the young male, they disproportionately think that North Korea is an enemy. So there's a huge the emotional difference between these two generations. And also the young males, it's not just male, the young generation in this case, they think the United States is a good friend and great ally. And on the other hand, they have a very antagonistic feeling toward China, and even getting worse, I have to say. It is, the critical point was the THAAD deployment and the economic retaliation by the China. But even before, when there was heydays between the China and the South Korea, the young generation didn't really trust that much of China. When we asked, what do you think of I mean, what does it come to your mind when you think of China first? And then young people said, well, it's just a vast country and in the large population, and they do not really relate to the ancient China, which can be more emotionally attached to by the Korean people. But we couldn't really see that kind of symptom. But in the case of the United States, there's a lot of other things. I mean, of course, economic power and the military and also a lot of other things. So very different. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not a really huge big fan of soft power theory because to me, sometimes it's a kind of vague. What is soft power and what is not soft power? But in this case, the soft power of the United States works for the young generation. Whenever they think of the U.S., it is always like iPhone, Steve Jobs, Microsoft, and Google, Disney, and everything. So maybe to the old generation, or well, I'm in my 40s, but I wouldn't call myself old, but these kind of, well-aged generation, maybe it is kind of ideological thing. It is, international relation, foreign policy thing. But to a lot of young generation of Korea, the U.S. is something like, the powerhouse of not just the hard power, but also the soft power. So that's a big difference. So that for that reason, the election of the presidential election of the U.S. this time was a big thing for a lot of Korean people because that determines where the U.S. is heading to and what will be the direction of this country that they would like to have a good friendship with, and so we'll see. I mean, how it will turn out, and I probably have some time to talk about how Korean people see this election later in this session. Well, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Very interesting as well. And last but not least, for this initial round of presentations, we have Director Lee, who directs the Hyundai Motor Korea Foundation Center for Korean History and Public Policy at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., even though today she's joining us from New York, nearby. You probably know her as the person who opened the Associated Press Pyongyang Bureau in 2012, and she was also the bureau chief for the Associated Press in Korea between 2008 and 2014. And during her time as a journalist, she was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize for future writing for her coverage of North Korea. So without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I think I speak on everyone's behalf in wishing we were in Jeju rather than in my bedroom in Brooklyn. But I'm very happy that we could take part in and have this discussion at such a timely moment. I know everybody is so fixated on what's happening with results, and I would ask some of you to send us some updates in the chat in case there's a breakthrough or a major development while we're having this discussion. I wanted to share a little bit of insight of what it's like to watch some of this unfold if you were in Pyongyang, because at times like this, I can't help but put myself back in Pyongyang and imagine how this would look when it's unfolding from North Korea. And trust me, Kim Jong-un is watching CNN. Foreigners like me and a small number of North Korean elites have access to CNN as well as BBC. And you can bet that they are just as transfixed as we are by how this election is unfolding. And one of my responsibilities as an American journalist working in Pyongyang was to explain to the North Koreans how things work in the United States. They have so little contact with the outside world. And I tried to serve as a bridge between them and the rest of the world. And at a time like this, I have no doubt that I will be trying to explain how the Electoral College works, even though I have to be honest, it's confusing even for us Americans, and why it might be days, if not weeks, before we know who will be in the White House in 2021. And you can imagine just how hard it is to untangle this election in a country like North Korea, where elections are a foregone conclusion, and any whiff of opposition is simply stamped out with death and violence. And so these are hard concepts to explain. What I will be telling them is that they need to watch and wait to see how this will end. just like we are. This is a function of democracy, and it can sometimes be messy. That is very hard for them to understand. I want to say that I think there's no doubt that Kim Jong-un would prefer another Trump presidency. He has taken advantage of President Trump's maverick style of diplomacy and the real opportunity that his impulsiveness and craving for attention and drama have provided. It's provided a particular opening that Kim Jong-un understands and has taken advantage of. And I would say that Kim Jong-un he saw an opportunity to secure legitimacy as well as a very specific status, and that is acknowledgement of North Korea as a nuclear weapons state. And he saw that President Trump was willing to offer that. And while their special relationship, their special friendship has not quite yielded everything that Kim Jong-un needs and wants, he's already invested so much in that relationship that he would prefer to stick to that process than start from the beginning. And I think as a result of these calculations, he's been lying low. It's not often that we have such an extended period without major North Korean provocations. It's been a relief, but we should not be under any doubt that he has quietly been improving his arsenal. And by doing that, he is strengthening his hand for the day when nuclear negotiations resume. And so despite what President Trump says, the nuclear threat from North Korea is not over. And the time that has elapsed since the last Kim-Trump summit in Hanoi in February 2019, it's hard to believe that's almost 2 years, but in that time, the time that has elapsed, he has certainly perfected and refined his nuclear and ballistic missile program. And so it has been a costly lapse in time overall to nuclear security in the region. Kim Jong-un has also been using this time while lying low and putting diplomacy on the back burner to focus on domestic issues. He's been fighting COVID and emphasizing public health. This is a time for him to rebuild his base at home. I am sure that the disappointments in Hanoi were a blow to his standing and some of the promises that he had made. But that focus on domestic issues, and he has already essentially told the people we're going to be focusing on these domestic issues through January, it gives him some time to wait and see how this election unfolds and to adjust his foreign policy and nuclear strategies accordingly. As I mentioned, he will be convening a party congress in January. That should give us some sign of what policy direction he intends to take in 2021. I think if we do have a Biden presidency, one thing we'll be watching is to see how quickly a Biden administration might lay out its foreign policy priorities. I think at the outset, a potential Biden administration would be consumed by the domestic issues, not only stemming and bringing this coronavirus pandemic under control, but also trying to figure out how to reinvigorate an economy that is going to be absolutely shattered by this extended pandemic. However, if North Korea doesn't figure into a Biden administration's foreign policy priorities quickly, I think that Kim Jong-un may turn back to a very tried and tested pattern of behavior of waging a major provocation to get back on Washington's radar. So that's something that we'll need to watch. 4 years ago, I did issue a warning to the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, saying they had a window of opportunity with Kim Jong-un. The North Koreans do give, maybe it's just a few weeks, but they do give some time to see how the new administration will deal with foreign policy and deal with North Korea in particular. But I did warn that if he waited too long to make a move, that Kim Jong-un would resort to provocation to get his attention and would manufacture tensions as a reason and excuse to build nuclear weapons. And we all remember what happened in 2017 with Fire and Fury. And so I wanted to mention that having been in North Korea during the years of Kim Jong-un's succession campaign, I saw, and I went into North Korea when I saw that North Korea was looking for an opening, looking for a window of opportunity to change the relationship with the United States. And the fact is that every Kim has wanted a better relationship with the United States. And no one more than Kim Jong-un, who truly does want to move away from war and focus on the economy when it's the right time for him. But he is not willing to give in to peace for free. And after using the purported threat of aggression from the United States as an excuse for keeping the country in a wartime mentality and spending these precious resources that they simply don't have to build nuclear weapons, he needs to extract a high price for peace and security. And so that is something that both leaders in the United States need to understand. And you have to understand the true extent of the poverty in North Korea to understand how high the stakes are for Kim Jong-un. Ambassador Yoon mentioned the long-suffering North Korean people. You know, you don't see it in the images that are broadcast through their state media. But this time of year, I mean, you cannot, without being there, understand how cold it is this time of year, and that they don't have adequate heat, food, clean water, medicine, and that's even in Pyongyang. And I know because I spent many long winters there alongside the North Koreans. While a sliver of the population, they live in relative comfort, most of them is facing a brutally cold winter. And while the Kims have invested in nuclear weapons instead of their people's well-being, they need those weapons to pay off politically and economically with not only legitimacy, but also major economic concessions. I think with a Biden administration, we would see a return to traditional diplomacy. We would see him he would see him work to repair relationships in the region. And I think this is important because I have found in my own dealings with the North Koreans that they like to play a game of divide and conquer. And the more we have regional unity and international unity, the more we will be able to bring them into the international fold. The less they are able to divide the neighbors, the less effective that strategy will be. And so I think that Kim Jong-un has played a very personality-driven leader-to-leader game with President Trump, and it's been effective to a certain degree. But if we are thinking about a long-term strategy, it has to involve everyone in the region. I think that in some ways the North Koreans may be relieved if we do have a return to traditional diplomacy after the ups and downs dealing with President Trump. I think the leader level summit diplomacy that Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump engaged in must have been enormously nerve-wracking for the North Korean officials who were tasked with setting them up. You know, while American negotiators may have at most faced dismissal via Twitter from their jobs, the North Koreans face far harsher punishment when things go wrong. And so I can't help but think about those North Korean negotiators, many of whom I know personally, because they were the ones I sat across the table with when I was negotiating the opening of the AP Bureau. I think about the pressure that they were under and the risks they took with their lives for what ultimately became a vanity project for the US president. The question I have is whether a Biden administration, and this is a question that Ambassador Yoon raised as well, is will a Biden administration be able to learn from past mistakes, move forward from where things left off, take advantage of the openings that President Trump offered, and find the right equation for resolving a nuclear situation that has become exponentially more complicated in the past 4 years. And I think that it was interesting in his last presidential debate that Vice President Biden said he would be willing to meet Kim on the condition that he would agree that he would be drawing down his nuclear capacity. I think the North Koreans' ears would have perked up at the words drawing down, because in some ways that gives them some wiggle room for negotiation. What I do think is that Joe Biden will be listening to his advisors, that he will be surrounding himself with very knowledgeable people who hopefully will be taking all stakeholders into account throughout the region. And I think he'll be taking the Korean people into account. As was mentioned, he did issue that op-ed to the South Korean media to speak directly to the South Korean people. I also mean the North Korean people. As I said, what's often missed, especially now when the country is so isolated, is just how much people are suffering in the shadows, those daily deprivations, the lack of basic resources, the human rights violations, their inability to speak up and move freely. These are things that we haven't seen much about in this era of summit diplomacy. I'm also heartened that the former vice president mentioned principled diplomacy in his recent op-ed to the South Korean public. I've often stated the importance of principled engagement with the North Koreans and the importance of bringing them back into the international fold while protecting security and while promoting the values that we want all good global citizens to uphold. And will that process be slower? Possibly. And will it be more thorough and better for the long-term security of the Korean Peninsula? I think definitely. And I think it will be better for both Koreas. When you have a strategy that takes all stakeholders' needs into consideration, not just the US needs, then you have a more sustainable strategy. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you. I have questions for Dr. Kim Ji-yoon, to be honest, but hopefully we can get into that in the moderated discussion.
Yes, thank you very much. And as you said, we're going to move on to the moderated discussion. To our audience, I've seen that some of the questions have started to pour in. There is a Q&A function on Zoom. Please add your questions there. If you can identify your organization as well, like some of you have been doing so far. So I think we're going to start discussing with the favorite to win the election. We see that it is highly likely that we'll have a President Biden if the results pan out the way they look like. And Ambassador Jun, I want to start with you because you touched on this and you said that President Biden wouldn't be an Obama 3. So can you please tell us in a bit more detail, what can we expect in terms of his approach to the North Korean nuclear issue? What might have changed from the Obama years to a potential Biden administration starting from January of next year?
Thank you very much, Dr. Pardo, and thank you to my other panelists. You guys are quite brilliant and really gave me, I learned a lot. When I was towards the end of Biden administration, of course, I was still in the government. We had realized by then that what is commonly known as strategic patience towards North Korea was just not working. And if you recall, one of the things that outgoing President Obama told Trump is that his greatest problem for US security was North Korea. So I took the job being special representative to North Korea around the summer of 2016. And at that time, we were desperate to engage North Korea, except that North Koreans wouldn't have anything to do with us, And so Jean is completely right in the sense that when a new administration comes in, North Koreans have to give some time for the new administration to get handle of it. And that's the thing I'm mostly worried about. Will North Korea give US some time to come up with an engagement strategy? I mean, I must say that more time North Korea gives US to come up with a strategy, then the better that strategy will be and better the chance of diplomacy being successful. So, I mean, if there is a single message, if I was talking to North Korean officials now, what I would tell them is, please give the new administration some more time. When I say that it would not, a new Biden administration will not be like the Obama administration, I mean that their instinct will be much more pro-engagement. And so I am optimistic that that's the strategy they will come up with in the end. But again, to emphasize, North Koreans have to give Americans some time to come up with that strategy. Whether a new engagement strategy will succeed or not, again, I think there are a lot of qualifiers, but I agree with Gene. We have to think much more long term. I think that's critically important. And I would hope that Biden, learning lessons of what has happened over the past decade or so, would come to a position. I would consider Biden administration having done their job if within 4 years we have a process in place that discusses issues like peace building, denuclearization at the same time. Thank you.
Thanks to you, very comprehensive actually. Chancellor Kim, I wanted to move to you because candidate Biden has said he wants to work with allies, and obviously he penned the op-ed with Yonhap talking about the alliance with South Korea. What do you think might happen under a potential Biden presidency in terms of the evolution of the alliance between the ROK and the US?
Yes, thank you. We are thinking of two big issues between the US and Korea, especially from the standpoint of Seoul, which is one is the North Korean issue and the other is alliance issues. And many people actually agree that regarding alliance relations, it's much better for if Biden can be a president, and then alliance relations much will improve and much better situation. And the North Korean issue, and many people in Korea think is, because the characteristics of North Korean regime, they favor top-down approach. And actually, I totally agree with Ambassador Yoon about the prospect of Biden administration. I don't think it will be a third Obama administration regarding North Korea. I totally agree with it. And actually, that strategic pages was criticized. I don't think Biden, I think he's smart enough not to repeat the 8 years of strategic patience. And actually, situation is totally different. At the time, North Korea was not really a nuclear armed state, but now they are not only a nuclear armed state, but also every day they're increasing, their capability, this nuclear power. But I think it's regarding this North Korean issue, but some people say that and suspicious, but and the director Lee talked about that. We are all afraid of, to North Korea is going to provoke, because U.S. government, new U.S. government have tons of job to do facing this, pandemic and the economy issue and all those domestic issues overwhelming. So North Korea issue is kind of the priority kind of decreasing, and they try to provoke. But yes, I agree partially, but I don't think they will just break down the whole table by doing strategic, provocation. I think they probably do some minor or kind of provocation, but I don't think they will just before. Because they had experience right after President Obama came to office, and then they blew it. They had a good time and the motivation and intention at the beginning, but they blew it, and they think that they regret it. Regarding alliance, lastly, very shortly, regarding this alliance issue, two things. Trump, actually, I really surprised that Trump, anyway, just downgraded and despised this relationship between the US and ROK. But here in Korea, still, I thought it can be a good turning point that demythify, not demythify this US-ROK alliance, but still no change. You know, Koreans are learned to separate the Trump and the alliance. That was very amazing to me, and actually, and this Biden camp consistently argued that they're going to recover, heal the alliance, which was destroyed by the Trump government, and they simply call it protection racket. Actually, that word actually I used before in Korea. So definitely regarding, especially like burden sharing issues and other issues, I think we will have a good relationship ahead. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you. A positive view of the alliance under a potential Biden administration. Dr. Kim, this leads me to one aspect that you have mentioned in a recent article, which is that the relations between the US and South Korea would probably improve under Biden, but there would be maybe some tensions. But before you also discuss the views that South Koreans have of the US, how do you think that the Biden administration would affect the views that the South Korean people have of the US, of the ally?
I first of all, I agree with the Chancellor Kim. He mentioned that somehow Korean people decoupled how they feel about the alliance and President Trump. That is one big difference between the US and China. When we have that deployment and economic retaliation, the favorability towards China and President Xi Jinping went down together. But in the case of the United States, when President Trump was elected, we did all the favorability score thing. And I remember when he was a candidate, it was his score was 1 point something on the scale of 0 to 10. So pretty low. But once he became and inaugurated as a president, it went up a little bit. And I remember it was hitting the record when there was a summit. But still, it was much lower than that of President Obama. And amazingly enough, the score for the United States, the favorability score, hasn't really changed that much. It was usually above 5.8, and sometimes it was a 6.5 or something like that. So on the range of high 5 and the low 6. So whoever becomes the president of the United States, Korean people have a pretty strong trust level in the country and also the alliance. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it will never change from that peak. Of course, when there's a more cost sharing issue was hurting the people's reputation about the United States. So I cannot guarantee that it will stay there forever, but still it has a very strong it maintained a very strong support among the Korean public. So I don't really think it would change or affect greatly whoever becomes the president. And if Biden becomes the president, I think actually it will go up. And one thing I like to mention is there's a really interesting support line in Korean public for the candidate of the United States. So I actually classified into 4, it's not 2 as usual. So 4, the first is traditional conservatives, and from the scholars from the traditional conservative pillar, they support Biden because they think the alliance is being hurt by under the Trump administration. And also the traditional liberals and the progressive, they support Biden. You know the reasons, I think, like those who are living in Portland, Oregon, and those are very traditional and ultra conservative guys. They support Trump because it is Republican Party, and they believe Trump is a very harsh and hard line towards China, and that's a very important thing. And also, there's another pillar of support for Trump is those who support Moon government of ROK. and big, huge supporters. They think if Trump becomes the president again, then there's going to be another summit between the United States and North Korea, and that will improve the relations between the U.S. and the North Korea and the ROK in North Korea, and that will improve the approval rating of President Moon. So there are 4 different kinds. And 2 are supporting the Biden, and another 2 is supporting Trump. That was really interesting, and it was very fun to watch on the internet community. They are fighting each other because it seems to be you guys are so conservative and supporting Biden, and Biden support and the same pillar, and they're supporting Trump anyway. So, so it seems that if I don't really think I completely agree with Ambassador Yoon and Chancellor Kim. I don't see if Biden becomes the president, he's not going to be like Obama. And how he treats China and how he treats North Korea will greatly influence Korean public opinion toward the U.S. and also president. But even though they do not like how the President Biden hypothetically treat North Korea and China, it won't change or influence dramatically about how Korean people think about the United States.
Well, thanks a lot for this deep dive on what might happen if Biden becomes president finally, and how this matter affects South Korean views. I want to move now to North Korea. Director Lee, you touched on this before, but let's assume that later today, US time or tomorrow morning, we have President Biden. He has been elected. He's going to be president from January. What do you think North Korea would want in the immediate future, over the next few weeks and months, from a President Biden to behave in one way or another?
I hope that we know by January who the next president is. I wanted to go back before I answer that question. Before I forget, I wanted to pick up on something Dr. Kim Ji-yoon said, because I think it's very important. Sorry, Dr. Pacheco Pardo, but she alluded to, and this is going back to South Korea, but I think it's an important point. She alluded both in her opening remarks and in her last comment to these generational differences in South Korea, and also to the gender differences. And I want to bring this up because I think in the United States or outside South Korea, we tend to think of South Korean opinion as being monolithic, but it varies so much by generation. And I found, as a teaching South Korean university students, it was very interesting. My students who had served in the military, South Korea, of course, has mandatory military service for young men, and their attitude toward North Korea was very different than their female counterparts because of that, perhaps because of their service. And so it's very interesting. I think we should recognize that there are these differences within the South Korean population, and that the younger generation may think very differently about what they want for their future than the older generation. And so this is something that any US president, whoever comes into the White House, needs to consider as well, that there's a broad range of opinion in South Korea. And going back to, I wanted to mention another thing which we haven't discussed so much when it comes to what North Korea wants. I do think that 2018 and 2019 and 2020 did not work out exactly the way that Kim Jong-un would have liked. I always look at their calendar, the North Korean calendar. They had they wanted to be able to, I suspect, sign some sort of peace agreement that was proposed on an end to the Korean War in time for that 70th anniversary. That didn't happen. But the pandemic, we have to acknowledge, and I want to throw this out there, is that North Korea has taken such extreme measures with the pandemic, and we don't know when this pandemic is going to end. And so it's very hard for me to predict how North Korea will behave, because not only is it going to be dependent on who is in the White House, but it's also going to depend on how comfortable they feel in emerging from their self-imposed isolation. And it may look from South Korea like you have it under control, but we do not have it under control here in the United States. And until a country like the United States has it under control, the entire world is going to be in a state of disruption. And so that's how the pandemic plays out, and how the North Koreans use that or deal with that is going to be a part of their calculation and how they interact with the outside world. I think Ambassador mentioned, I think it's very important for a Biden administration, if a Biden administration does come into office, to signal very early and very quickly that they are open to negotiation, but to be very clear about what the preconditions or terms are, so the North Koreans can start building their strategy as well. I think it's important, it would be important for the Biden administration to empower South Korea to have a role as well, which I think they would do, and to work in tandem with Seoul to show the North Koreans that they can't split the alliance, that they can't go to one and ice out the other when it's convenient for them, which we're seeing now. I do think the North Koreans want to engage with the South Koreans and with the United States, but when the time is right. And they may think that they're not in a good enough position, given what happened in Hanoi, that they need to stay a bit more isolated and work on the program, perhaps refine some of that technology. And that's with the provocations. I think that if we do see a provocation from North Korea, they have multiple purposes. It is to test the technology. It is to send a reminder. And so it might be those two things, and those two things alone are things that we need to watch for. So I think it's important for a Biden administration to send that signal early on that they would be open to negotiations with certain conditions and to set their terms. I think if we do have a Trump administration, it'll be interesting to see whether President Trump has an appetite for resuming picking up a relationship that I think gives him real pleasure. If he does, then we may see another summit. But so much of his actions have been about what he needs, his reelection, and not so much about what the nation or the world need. And so it'll be interesting. Does he need it? Does he want it? Is he still gunning for a Nobel Peace Prize? And then in that case, we may see another summit if he wins this reelection. Did I miss a part of your question? I'm sorry, I've been meandering a bit and going off base.
No.
Okay.
That was great, and actually this is great because it leads me to. I had some questions I wanted to ask about President Trump being reelected, but all of you have already touched on him, and we do have quite a few questions from the audience. So I think I want to move to those, and especially the first one I wanted to get to you because it relates directly to a potential President Biden, and this comes from John Grady, a journalist with USNI News, and he's asking, this is a question for the panel, for the whole panel. He's asking whether the US and South Korea should resume their large-scale military exercises if Biden assumes office, or whether this could endanger Trump's personal diplomacy with Kim. And related to this, do we know anything about how is the command transfer, the OPCON transfer issue proceeding, and also the status of burden sharing negotiations? So if you want to, anyone who wants to pick up these questions, please go ahead.
Well, maybe I'll give it a shot, Dr. Pardo. On your first question, certainly, I mean, if I was still in the government, what I would advise is that, let's have quiet time for a while, see what develops. So I certainly would not advise Biden's team to resume joint exercise. More than that, I think we need to consolidate the gains, the stability gains we've made. So I think that's very important. I mean, I would even go further and advise them that we can say what's happened in the past agreements, even the Singapore agreement between Trump and Kim Jong-un, I think the Biden team should acknowledge them. I think that would give certainly a momentum that we stay in this stability space for a while. Regarding the military questions you ask, such as OPCON and SMA, unlike in South Korea, these alliance issues are not as polarized. I think you saw Dr. Kim Jun-young talking about polarization in Korea. And so these issues in the United States are not political issues. So we do have an opportunity to resolve them technically. You know, what that technical solution is, of course, there are many solutions. SMA, certainly they can come to a reasonable agreement and not be quite so demanding as the Trump administration was. Similar to OPCON transfer, it is a technical issue and it should be solved by military. So I am worried. I mean, as we, both Dr. Kim, two Dr. Kims there, talked about the political issues that this peninsula challenges have become is not the same in the United States. So I'm more optimistic that US will be able to help solve these issues in a technical manner, not in a political manner. Thank you.
Maybe we can have one of the speakers in
Well, maybe
Korea
I
pick
can
up this
add a
question as
little
well.
bit.
Yes, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just add just kind of two-finger thing. I totally agree with Ambassador Yoon. Joint military drill is probably not the first thing that Biden administration would like to do when it inaugurate. Many Korean people, even those who support and really like President Trump and his summit with the Chairman Kim, still they do not really think highly of the coastal sharing issue. I mean, they thought, oh, it's ripping off Korea, and it's kind of downgrading the reputation of the United States. So if that can be solved by the Biden administration and not a joint military drill, then I'm pretty sure that the government will gain the reputation again, because people were a little bit sensitive on that issue, and it's not resolved for a long time. It should have been resolved before. So that if I'm advising anything, although I'm not in this position, then I probably ask them to go for and they figure out how to resolve the cost sharing issue.
So I think the next question that we can have maybe Chancellor Kim and Director Lee, because it's a question for the whole panel as well. And it comes from Soo-Young Kim, from a journalist from the RFA back in the US. And she's saying that we should expect whoever wins the election, the US and China to continue to have some sort of conflictual relationship. Relations might even get worse. And she makes the point that China is a close ally of North Korea. So potentially North Korea and China could become closer if the US-China conflict deepens. So the question that she has for the panelists is, how should the US administration manage its relations with China, assuming that it still wants to have negotiations and engagement with North Korea? Chancellor Kim, do you want to go first, and then we can have Director Lee?
Actually, I'm sorry. I lost your questions. Can you repeat?
Yes. The question is asking, how should the US manage the relationship with China, assuming that it still wants to have negotiations with North Korea?
No, okay. Because Biden government actually have been saying that there are two areas that US and China can cooperate. One is climate change issue, and the other one is North Korea issue. And Biden wants to solve this problem, especially drawing the influence of China. So in that sense, I think I'm glad. I don't think I don't think it means that the revival of the six-party talks. I don't think so. And he talked about this during with Kim Jong-un, even though he used the talk, but I think some people are concentrating on that comment, but I actually concentrate on the later comment that he said he could meet him if Kim Jong-un does something. And in that sense, I think we have to make utilize of Chinese influence, even though I don't think China's influence is that much, and North Korea is actually looks, they are right now they seem okay, but they actually in a dilemma situation too. I don't think they're in near future they're worrying about the collapse, but they know that time is not on their side, and they need some motivation to come out. And actually, I want to add two things. I think if Biden wins, I think the two issues very important. One issue is timing, and everybody's talk about, we understand that Biden new government needs time, to appoint and to think about it and to meditate what to. But considering our time here, if the time is too late and then we are going into another election, president's election here. So I wish and I hope, and I'm trying to advise my government to jump in and then, to try to cooperate and sometimes give some advice. And I think we should start not too fast, but we need to kind of accelerate this. Another one, actually, I want to talk about these, advisors right now, especially security and foreign policy team to be. Maybe Ambassador Yoon can help me, or I want your reaction. I heard a lot of people, actually two groups, in my opinion. One is actually regionalists, we call it, North Korean, South Korean, or Korean Peninsula, or China experts there. Many people are Asian experts. The other part is a functionalist, proliferation issues and North Korean nuclear or denuclearization and experts. We know that Biden's the top asset is he has ear to listen to experts, like a pandemic and this nuclear denuclearization issue of North Korea. If that's the case, I think it's depending on the who, Biden listened to more. If, some people, especially regionalists, many people are still hardline towards North Korea. And many hardliners actually who are disappointed by Trump actually joined the camp. I don't know who will be the actual position holder, but that's the one case. The other one is, then actually I'm really expecting, because this functionaries are trying to say that one insight I heard from them is North Korea is not what it was before in terms of nuclear power capability. In old time, it's a very primitive, and then only plutonium, it can be denuclearized in one day, on single day, not one day, but comprehensive approach is realistic before. But now the menus of a nuclear power on the table is so diverse. So it's not really realistic to denuclearize North Korea overnight. So maybe we have to accept interim stage, step by step, even though we know that, not salami tactics, but 2 or 3 actually comprehensive agreement, but the implementation should be, 2 or 3 staged. It's not really politically popular policy, but I think Biden listened to them, or we try to Biden to listen to this expert is a more positive prospect. I want to actually, as I said, ask your opinion.
Let's get Director Lee first to answer this question about China in U.S. policy towards North Korea.
So going back to the issue of China, I think the issue of strategic competition is not going to go away with a new administration, in the sense that I think that South Korea will have to deal with the issue, and North Korea will have to deal with the issue of a rising China for some time to come, and that will be a persistent challenge for decades. And I think that perhaps what might be different is that a potential Biden administration may not be asking them to choose, as the Trump administration has. The Trump administration has really, with its Indo-Pacific strategy, really tried to press them to choose sides between the US and China. And we've heard many South Koreans say, we can't choose, we have to live with China. And so perhaps with a Biden administration, we'll see a different type of discussion around US-China strategic competition and the rise of China. Now with North Korea, and this is something that I think is it's very good to mention China, because if the North Koreans need more time to figure out what their strategy will be with either a new Biden administration or a second term Trump administration, they may choose to focus on what they know, which is to turn more to China and Russia, its traditional allies. And so I think it's very important that either administration, whichever one is in power in 2021, takes that into consideration, that the more they put this issue of North Korea and nuclear negotiations on the back burner, the more they will push them toward reaching out to China and Russia and losing the engagement that they've built under the Trump administration. So that's an important question to take into consideration. And as I said, I think the important factor would be returning to regional unity, making sure that all of North Korea's neighbors are consulted, that the response is coordinated, and to prevent providing that opening for North Korea to play that game of divide and conquer. So I think that's an important point, the China factor, and what role it could play in dealing with North Korea.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have 8 more minutes, and I wanted to ask the panel one last question coming from the audience. This comes from His Excellency Alfredo Labe, who used to be the Chilean ambassador to the Republic of Korea. And I think this is a question actually for our Korean panelists, because he's asking whether the deterioration of the nuclear arms control regime and the de facto acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear power by the US, will this actually make South Korea to consider developing a military nuclear program? So he points out that maybe the nuclear powered submarine project is the prelude for this potential development. Can we have the views from South Korea, please?
Maybe before we go there, if I can just address Dr. Kim Jun-young's questions he raised, because he really did raise very important question, which is there an emerging view in Washington that is different from the traditional views? I would say yes, there is. There are really 3 realities in Washington that I do believe Biden will take into account. One is the belief, almost a consensus belief, that North Korea is not going to denuclearize, certainly not going to denuclearize within foreseeable future. That's a very strong one view. Second view is that maximum pressure. It doesn't matter how much pressure you put on North Korea, is not going to work. Okay, that's the second view that is emerging. Third view that is emerging in Washington is still Americans cannot recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. So the challenge is, how do you make these realities consistent with your policy? And that's the challenge that Biden will have. And so that's a very difficult issue, which is why some people advocate that we should begin with arms control issues. But again, the third view, that we cannot recognize North Koreans, comes into direct conflict with that. If you are doing arms control negotiations, well, you are recognizing North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. So this is what diplomacy is. How do you marry these inconsistent views that are in conflict with something that is digestible to everyone? So that's a challenge that Biden will face. Thank you.
No, thanks to you. And I'll move to the other question that I mentioned before, a clarification. I actually said Alfredo Labey was ambassador to the Republic of Korea. I meant to the United Nations, actually. I don't know why I mixed both of them. In any case, if you can please answer the questions, our Korean panelists.
I may have some answers for that. Well, when I was at ASEAN, we did a lot of public opinion polls, and then one of them was asking how much the South Korean people want our own nuclear weapons. I know it is Korean, South Korean, not just South Korea, now the North Korea as well. The Korean people love the nuclear weapons. I think that's kind of common knowledge in the Washington DC, I think. Well, somehow the nuclear weapon and development of it became sort of a national pride. It is considered by the Korean public overall, I have to admit. Whenever we did our own public opinion polls, and other companies and other polls indicate that more than 60% of South Korean people wanted to have our own nuclear weapons. I mean, you can say that it's before the summit, so maybe the tension was higher, but still, regardless of that, a lot of Koreans agree that we would like to have the nuclear weapons, and they kind of symbolize how great this Korean military power and the national power is. But another thing I found really interesting was we had a follow-up question. So if we had a nuclear weapon, there would be some other consequences, such as economic sanctions by the global community, and maybe there should be the arms race in the region, and the U.S. will do the sanctions, put the sanctions on South Korea, and other some bad consequences. And that follow-up questions indicated that, oh, then South Koreans actually tracked it. So yeah, it'll be good to have a nuclear weapon. But once they acknowledge that there might be some consequences, which is harming or damaging the Korea, then they kind of retracted, and then I'll reconsider that. So it is about the information that we do not really have that much. So having the nuclear weapons have some the terrible consequences that we have to face. Although I know some complaints are coming up from the progressive side that then why did those big 5 countries and some other countries unknowingly countries are only having the nuclear weapons, and why not us? But still, South Koreans overall like to have a big power, military power, and nuclear power can be, but they are not really very serious on that. So I personally think it depends on how the government deal with this issue, how the government publicize what are the consequences of having the nuclear weapons, and why we are not having the nuclear weapons or not developing nuclear weapons, and not just for South Korea's own sake, but for we have to think about the global community and being responsible player in the international scene, and this is a time for us to do so. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Thank you. I think we'll have to leave it there. Before I give the floor to Director Lee, I want to thank the audience for being with us. I'm sorry that we couldn't get all the questions in. I also want to thank, of course, the 4 panelists for their excellent discussion today. I think we covered a lot of ground on a potential President Biden and a potential second term for President Trump. And of course, I want to thank the Jeju Forum for hosting us, for hosting both the Wilson Center, Korea Center, and the KFUB Korea Chair. So without any further ado, Director Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Pacheco Pardo. I want to thank you because this was the timing of this was so tough in the sense that we knew when we were asked to present this discussion and this panel on November 5th that we may not have a result. And so it's been a lot of pressure, I think, for both you to prepare questions as well as for our panelists to be able to answer such a broad range of questions with various options. So thank all of you, and to the Jeju Forum who has allowed us to share this event. Of course, we wish to be there. Now, I wanted to make sure that you all keep in touch with us. the Dr. Pacheco Pardo's Institute puts out excellent analysis and research, and we on the Wilson Center site will be sharing some of the writing from Ambassador Yoon and Dr. Kim and our other panelists to help shed some light on how to look at these issues, and then also the analysis that we'll be sharing going forward. And so thank you so much, all of you, for joining us here today. And I will let you get back to watching the election and the results as they come in, and hopefully we'll have a final answer soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So last comment? Okay. Should I? Okay. Thank you very much. And I really learned a lot. And as you said, it's really, for the past 48 hours, it's very agonizing to watch CNN all the time. And then my eyes turned red, actually. And then actually I appeared on several TVs and the radio for the past 2 days. Actually, I'm really tired, but I learned a lot. And actually, Ambassador, thank you very much. You're waking up so early, and stay healthy. And good to, I want to see you in the near future. And thank you very much to organizer Wilson Center and Dr. Pardo. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you very much. It was great. Thanks.
Thank you all.